Hello, can you guys hear me loud and clear? So before I begin, I would like to thank the Vim JP community for actually hosting this conference. I think it's pretty interesting and awesome to actually have a conference for a text editor. We have so many conferences for all sorts of languages and tools we use, but not one for the text editor. So it's a big shout out to them. Like, definitely go give them a clap. I mean, to me, even though I have not communicated with the Vim JP community, I think it's actually very dear to my heart, as in a lot of patches they sent is very awesome. Like, they've ported lots of things to the Windows. They've added lots of different features. And I think without them, I would not actually be using Vim. So, I mean, it's like, if you guys are part of the Vim JP community, like, you should congratulate yourself and be proud of it. Like, I think it's a very awesome community to be at. So before I sort of go into my talk, I would like to sort of introduce myself at who am I. I currently work at Microsoft. I'm one of the engineering managers for Microsoft Flow. I've also worked in several other different products, such as Logic Apps, which is very similar to Microsoft Flow. If you have also been using Azure, I have also written the Storage Explorer you see in the portal. So you might have been using some of the tools that I have actually written. I also have lots of different open source projects, but in this particular presentation, I'll be talking about some of my core projects, such as Vim LSP, which is a language server protocol. I'll sort of go deep dive into that. I also have written another plugin for the autocomplete, which is completely written in script, known as Async Complete. There's also a lot of other plugins, such as async.vim and quick.vim. I've also initially written the TypeScript language server, though I never have touched the compiler of the TypeScript. So that's some of the technical pieces of what I actually could do. I'm also very passionate into flying. So this is actually one of the things I've been actually doing. So I've been actually learning how to fly airplanes. And that's the picture of my first solo landing. It's pretty fun and awesome. So if anyone asks you, like, Vim is hard, there's a lot more things that are a lot harder than Vim. So Renaissance, if we go back to the 14th century, one of the things we will actually notice quite a lot is how that 14th to 17th century has actually revolutionized how we sort of run our country in terms of politics, in terms of art, in terms of design, and yet we still go to Europe to go visit some of these even till now. And to me, I think this is what is actually currently happening in Vim. I think the past few years has really been about the Vim Renaissance. I think Neovim, we have one of the core contributors here. I think that it has fundamentally changed. Whether you use Vim, Neovim or not, it has fundamentally changed, I think, how Vim has been worked. There's also lots of interesting things that has introduced, such as async jobs and channels. It has fundamentally changed how we sort of write plugins and how we use day-to-day life. There's things like embedded terminal. If you've been using plugins such as like FZF, you might not even have noticed that you're actually using embedded terminals. But there's a lots of great. And with recent additions to floating windows, again, some of the things that has been pioneered by Neovim. Lots of very cool stuff. There's a lot more that's sort of coming. But I think in the past few years and for the next few years, I think we're really seeing the rebirth of Vim and how people sort of use Vim. So while I've been using Vim for might be over a decade or even more, from universities to work, one of the things I've actually done a lot is actually been using lots of different editors, from JetBrains like WebStorm, app codes. I used to also code in Objective-C for iOS applications, IntelliJ for your Android Java. You've got WebStorm. I even did join the dark side for some time, which is the Eclipse, and I did even try the Vim Eclipse plugin, Sublime Text, Visual Studio, VS Code, Xcode. And the problem with that was every editor I use, I need to go relearn how I use it, which means how do I use go to definition? Like my function keys are completely different based to even products like with JetBrains. What happens is because an app code tries to behave like Xcode, so now even though it's the product from the same company, you're sort of learning different keystrokes to actually be more productive. So one of the really good things about when I joined at Microsoft was for the past 5 years at Microsoft, the only thing I got to actually work on was TypeScript. So it actually made me a lot much better sense that I could now just use one editor at work, at home, for other open source projects and just continue to use it. So for the past 5 years, I've literally just been using Vim, and it's been a pretty great journey for me. And I'll sort of talk about some of the things I sort of faced about this. So one of the biggest thing I missed when I moved to Vim was this concept of trying to do go to definition, autocomplete, and all this sort of things. So at Microsoft, what we actually do have is once a month, there is an open source community where we sort of go give talks about it. So what I saw was before the VS Code got released 1 month earlier, I saw a demo of it with debugging, and it was pretty awesome, cool to see that finally you could have one editor that conquers all the core language. So while it got released a bit later, one of the really important pieces that sort of also got released was the language server protocol. So rather than having each and every different editors use different languages to talk with different language, now what you have with language server protocol is you have one language, one way to sort of talk with all these different varieties of code. So for example, if you're writing in Vim, you have to learn how to use Vim script. If you're writing in Xcode, you got to learn how to use its own plugin system. VS Code, you got to use its own. And when you go back to not just that, like if you look in terms of the language authors of, let's say, a TypeScript or a Python, all they want to do is they want to make their own language great and not have to depend on this 100 different editors. So language server protocol that sort of got released really sort of helped that happen. So how it internally works is me as a language author, I can just write in whatever language I'm comfortable. Usually it is the source language itself. So for example, if I'm writing Python language server, I'm most likely writing the compiler itself in Python. There's a lot of different things, such as debugging, autocompletes. A lot of this information that is generated by the compiler the language server knows about it. So what now happens is, rather than going and writing some other plugin into all different editors, all these language server does is they go and write into one language. So Python language server, TypeScript language server, JavaScript language servers, and a wide variety of these. Lots of code gets reused across the compiler based on how they sort of work. So now what you have is, rather than having hundreds of different plugins that does not actually satisfy all your core needs, what you now do is work on just one plugin that just works consistently across different languages. And not just this, it also means, for example, there might be a language which really works great with IntelliJ, but rather than like, hey, I need to go move to that core editor, I can now use the editor that I love and sort of work on it. So this really simplifies the work of me as a plugin author as well as for the language author. So how does this thing actually happen? Now, rather than going and writing in all these different sorts of languages, what actually happens is there's this common protocol, usually by the JSON RPC, which then people or editors, they talk with SCDIO. It could also be either Unix sockets, WebSockets, or HTTP. But most of the language servers currently talks with SCDIO. So it's basically standard input, standard output. You basically spawn a process, and then you start communicating with the core editor. And I'll sort of go a bit into what a JSON RPC sort of looks like. So if you come here and sort of see, this is one of the requests at what happens when I click go to definition. So the Vim plugin or the Sublime Text plugin or whatever editor you use, they will sort of go create a JSON request, you have the JSON RPC, which is v2.0. You have the ID, and this is primarily so that you can either cancel or request or reply to the particular request. Then you actually tell, hey, what method you want to do. All this is part of the language server specification. So in this case, it's text document / definition. Then, based off that params, you assign a bunch of different params based off that method. So for example, in this case, it's a very simple C program with hello world with main.c. It uses the file : / protocol. So this means it tries to be compatible with whatever operating system you're using. Then it explicitly tells you, hey, it's at line number 3, character 12. So now what happens is you can use any different editors to generate the same JSON format. Now, most of the editors already supports converting JSON. In Vim, we have the JSON encode and decode. Plus, we can use the async job controls to sort of make that request. Now, what happens is once you send this request via an STD or with sockets, you sort of get a response. And the response includes your ID, so you can sort of map it. Because it's usually asynchronous, you could be sending multiple number of requests. So it's very useful to have that ID. You get the response, and then and based on your request, it could have different response. But if you look at it, the general idea, it's very simple. You sort of send a request, hey, I want to do this, and then you get a reply with like, hey, this is what you sort of could do. And because it's all asynchronous, you sort of don't hang your editors. So why Vim LSP? So when I actually worked with Vim LSP, there was literally, I think, 0 LSP plugins out there. In fact, it was so frustrating to me that whenever I searched the internet, it used to come back to like my comment somewhere on it. So it was like that bad. So why did I sort of work in Vim LSP? So first is I wanted to have the same consistent behavior, whether I'm writing it for a language A or language B. Like I don't care. Like I want my productivity to be fast. I want to actually solve the problem I'm trying to actually solve and not fight with the editor. So it needed to be very minimal, no legacy. This means there's lots of Vim plugins out there which tries to support Vim version 7 or like 7.3, 7.4, and it just, as a plugin author, it's just a maintenance headache for me. So it's one of the things I sort of do in Vim LSP is, hey, it's a tool for engineers. People know how to update their system. Just go update your system. And what we'll do is we'll rather instead put, hey, you need to require this higher version of the thing. So that's one of the tricks you can also do when you are working on Vim. Consistent across all operating systems. So for me, it's working on multiple operating systems is very important, actually. So in fact, one of the ways I develop my plugins or work on the open source is I literally use 1 week, I'm just going to work on Mac. The next week, I'm just going to work on Linux. The next week, I'm just going to work on Windows. And so for me, it's very much important. Because what this allows is, it allows this entire community to come and contribute to it, and not just like, hey, I'm just going to work on this operating system or this language. So when you have this cumulative people working from all sorts of world, it sort of makes it a lot easier. Async only. So basically, with the async job controls, there's async. Like no more, when you save, there's no more hang. Works both on Vim 8 and Neovim. Again, this is the same philosophy of multiple operating systems. When you have more people working on it, the better patches you get, more views you sort of get. And one of the biggest issues I've had with lots of plugins being written in Python is, me as not a Python dev, I used to get really irritated with people updating their Python, or like, hey, for Vim, I need Python 3, and there's this one random plugin that needs Python 2, or like I need to use some other operating system or some tools that has default as Python 2, and it just, rather than going and actually solving my problem, I was actually wasting my time trying to figure out how to install this Python, and especially on Windows, it's a very difficult thing to actually get it right. And performance was another very important aspect, because every time you sort of go look at these different plugins, everything is synchronous, and there's no plugins that actually solve the need. In fact, I actually started writing this plugin 3 years back. I've actually tagged it as v0.1.0. You can actually go look at it. The client.vim is what it sort of interacts with it. It's just around 200 lines of code. And this was also the time when I was actually learning how to write Vim script. So till 3 years back, I had no idea how to write Vim script. All I could do was edit my Vim RC and then like try to copy some others' code and sort of code. And it was very much tested with the language server, the Golang. So Golang was also very much new to me, so that was also something I sort of was using. So because the language server protocol was such new at that time, it is very difficult to actually find a language server that sort of works. And in this time, when I had built a lot of the language server features, such as go to definition, go to implementation, there was lots of thing that was actually missing in terms of the autocomplete engine. All the autocomplete engine that ever existed till the language server protocol did not satisfy the language server protocol features. So what I went is, because I was so frustrated with searching on the internet and all I get is an answer back to me, what I went is I went and started implementing async complete.vim. Again, I was very much new to the Vim script, had sort of no idea, so I was literally looking at all these different plugins at how they sort of do, spending a lot of time reading it. And that is when 3 years back, I sort of went like, hey, I'm going to take a break on Vim LSP, and then I'm going to work on async complete.vim. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of show you guys so a lot of people still are not fan of LSP. Actually, how many people out here use the LSP or know about LSP? Can you guys raise your hands? Okay, that's a pretty good amount. So one of the things I do say is if you're not using it, go use it because it really sort of helps you out. Especially me, these days I actually don't code as much as I would like to as a manager. So I'm always looking at a lot of PRs, helping people out, and actually going dive. So it's very important for me. And this is also a very good example when you're trying to learn a language or trying to discover large code bases and sort of helps out. So what I'm going to first show you is async complete. So for example, as I start typing, it sort of gives me this IntelliSense. One of the also core things we've recently added is as I'm sort of learning, it allows to use this floating windows, gives me lots of different values. And a lot of these floating windows and a lot of plugins that people contributed to is actually not written by me. They've contributed to Vim LSP, but it allows you to do a lot of things. So now, another core option is you can also do option, see this, study at how the core language sort of works or how your IntelliSense sort of works. Another core good things about this is a lot of people sort of tell like, hey, why can't I just use a C tags autocomplete, or why can't I just use my buffer autocomplete? And it's actually very important at why it is so much better when you use the LSP protocol. So for example, here you have TS server path, TS log verbosity, and then when I sort of type T, it knows that, yes, it could have used a lot of different autocomplete, but it explicitly told me that, hey, you can only use TS server log file because others are already part of this. So if you have not used language server protocols, definitely use it. So one of the things also you could sort of do is code actions. So here's an example where I just deleted that. It sort of showed me something was wrong. So now I can sort of do an LSP code action and I can tell, hey, go and sort of import it. So now if I go and look at it, it automatically imported it, right? So all these scenarios are how to make your life better, because when you're actually working on a very large code base, sometimes you don't know where things are. Rather than like actually trying to fight, you're actually just trying to solve the problem. So lots of pretty cool things you can sort of do. This the same, again, you can do a go to definition, you can continue to start core learning. Instead of using C tags, it allows you to really go there and make use of the best of the core language server protocol. And one thing you've noticed is it's so fast right now. The reason it is fast is while you start loading your file, on the background, there's been a process that has been started for the language server protocol. It's talking with async jobs control. One of the recent changes we have also done is do diff, so that it will actually only transfer a minimal amount of data to the language server, making it really fast. So current state of LSP. So what I'm saying is go use LSP. It will literally change how you write code. It does not have to be Vim LSP. There's lots of different LSP. In fact, in Vim, it is, I think, it has the highest number of LSP protocols from AL, COG, Language Client, Vim LSC, and Vim LSP. And one of the really interesting things I like about these plugins is every plugin actually implements slightly different, which means they have their own goals, trying to do the best what they can. So go play with it if you have not. I really suggest you to sort of go and try it out. So one of the very unique things that I have done with most of the plugins I have written is it's completely in Vim script. And as part of that, even though it's been just 3 years working on it, there's lots of things I've sort of learned across and how to sort of do. And this particular one is, I think every problems in computer science can be solved by another level of indirection. Like there was so many great plugins that either is only Neovim or it's only Vim 8. And that sort of used to drive me crazy. So what I sort of did was hey, because everyone is complaining about me that hey, these APIs are different. One of the first things I did is okay, I'm gonna build it for you so you guys can go use it. So what I did was I went built an async.vim. I like the Neovim APIs a lot better, so I sort of based it off Neovim. So it's almost a pass through to it. And whenever you sort of create this, it really helps you out. Think about when you sort of use plugin. Again, can people from different operating system, can people from different language use this? And this really allows you to be better. Another one is plan for cross-platform from day one. That's, I think, one of still the biggest issues right now in the Vim plugins. So if you're a Vim plugin author, definitely plan for it, I think. You can start with just Unix or Windows first, and then you can sort of go build on top of it. This has actually helped us solve a lot of different bugs very easily for us. And another thing I would like to also say is I think Vim script is most likely not your bottleneck. One of the things I say this is because our CPUs and RAM has increased so much that we always take things for granted. And I do like to sort of show you one example of one of the plugins. So here I'm going to sort of show you a plugin that I've written called Quick Pick. It's still work in progress, not complete, but it sort of shows you how, rather than just writing plugins, to really reimagine how you sort of do. Because I work a lot in UX, for me, trying to get that experience right is very much important. So think of this more as a quick pick. So what I can do is I can search for add package. And as soon as I search add package, it sort of gave me a list of all the packages that it could sort of be there. So one of the things it did was there's no network request. So now I can sort of start searching. Let's say I do want to add Redux. Now one of the things you saw is it's very responsive. There's spinners out there. Rather than going and downloading the entire JSON file and then do searching, leverage that client. And one of the things I continue to say is it's a lot faster to search the entire web than search your machine. So lots of cool things you can sort of do. So I think as a plugin author, definitely look at how you can sort of improve that. Give feedback to the user. And this is one of the core things. It's used completely in Vim script. It's not doing anything fancy. All it's doing is it's spawning a curl command on the background, running some command. It hits the NPM website, lets the NPM do a lot of crazy things, optimization, and sort of gives it back. And again, like it's just been 3 years that I've actually been completely in Vim script. We've had more than 60 plus contributors to Vim. So there is quite a lot of people who actually sort of know how to write Vim plugins. One of the also very interesting thing that I've actually done with my project is something what I call open source. You can actually go and visit the site called opensource.org. It's actually pretty interesting. So one of the things what I did with this was because I was very much busy and I was trying to fly the plane. What I did was, if you are a contributor to my project and you've been contributing pretty good, serious amount of patches, I will actually give you write permission to the repository. Right now we have like 2 people, Matt and Thomas. Huge is right there. So huge thanks to them. Like they've actually done a lot of great contributions to it. And I've just given like, hey, you guys know what you're doing. I think you guys are great Vim script people, so just go do it. So if you guys have open source projects, something that you can't sort of manage, definitely give it a try. It's also really good to see at how they are doing. I'm actually learning quite a lot from them too. So definitely go give that a try. So before I sort of end my talk, I sort of talked about this Renaissance period of like, how Neovim has completely changed at how Vim has worked. We've had async job controls. I think the next few years is going to be a lot more interesting. There is actually one person who's actually worked on it. And I do want to sort of say is like, if me as a Vim plugin author, though I write all plugins in Vim script, I'm actually not a huge fan of it. There's lots of issues with it, as in we have lambdas, but I can't write lambdas in multiple lines. So it sort of does not solve the problems, right? And with async, it's very difficult to coordinate asynchronous tasks. Like think about in JavaScript, we had all this callback else. Now we had promise. It's very difficult to sort of express exactly what you want to do. And to me, I think the next revolution comes when we have an explicit JavaScript or ECMAScript interface in Vim. And I think might be, if there's hackathon, maybe people would sort of go work on it. But to people who are in C and coding to Vim, I would really see if someone could actually go contribute to it. The reason for this is, I started working with Vim in universities. There are universities where they don't allow you to execute random executables, right? So that's one reason why you can't use Python or you can't use Lua unless it sort of actually comes embedded into Vim. Even in workplace, even at work right now, there are certain machines I cannot just go and randomly run executable binaries, but I want to use Vim. And you can already see this by VS Code, like the amount of extensions that we have. Right now, we have very few people in the Vim community that is very much into Vim script. So all these plugins that we currently have is limited by this sort of core user. So I think having that ECMAScript, having the JavaScript interface in Vim as a first-class citizen would really actually help this entire people in the room or even more to actually contribute. And I think that's where we'll actually have the next revolution in Vim after this async. And similar to that, while I think WebAssembly is good, I don't think it is core a must, but for people who hate JavaScript, I think WebAssembly, again, having this native interface, it's almost as fast as your binaries will actually really help. So these are, I think, the next 2 things I really look forward to it. There is a implementation of the ECMAScript using the doc tape, but besides that, I don't think anyone actually has this current implementation. So if you guys want to, I think, have the next big impact, these are some of the work that you can sort of think about. And that's the end of my talk. If anyone has questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
質問は日本語でも大丈夫です。Any questions? If you have a question, just come down here to grab the microphone.
じゃあちょっとすみません、日本語で失礼いたします。質問ではないんですが、Vim LSP は私は Ruby と Go で、使っています。で、ものすごく便利に使っていて、今日はですね、使わせてくれてありがとうってことを一言どうしても言いたくってですね、ちょっと手を挙げさせてもらいました。ありがとうございます。
Yeah, he said that he really wanted to say thank you to you because he has been using Vim Go. He's using the LSP for Go and Ruby literally every day.
Okay, that's great. Like, thank you. I think it's you guys have. There's lots of contributors out there actually that has contributed a lot more. While I did start the initial Vim LSP, I think there's lots of people. I think even around here in vim-jp community that has made it awesome. In fact, like all the things I demoed about Vim LSP is actually not what I wrote. It's actually the contributors of Vim LSP. So you should also definitely thank those people.
Well, I completely agree that extensibility probably is like the central theme of like the next Vim revolution. What do you see different about like a JavaScript interface compared to Python? Because, you know, like similar to the Python case, the JavaScript ecosystem would not be, you know, carried along with just a JavaScript interface.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think Python is if we can embed Python inside Vim, like one of the examples I gave was the university or even work machine, like we cannot just go run like random executable files, and trying to get Python really running reliably on a Windows machine or even on, it's almost impossible. At least that's what I sort of core felt, right? Like every time I sort of core go, rather than like going updating plugins, I'm going and updating Python, wasting a lot of time. And I think that was my core experience. I've actually tried to write async complete and all those in Lua too. But I think Lua as a language itself has not been so much active. So I definitely think the JavaScript world is a lot better in that sense. Now, whether we can get full compatibility with Node modules or not, with the NPM ecosystem or not, I'm not quite sure about that. But for me, like I just want to write in a language that embeds as part of the Vim or Neovim, that comes as a first class without me installing a lot of things. So once I get an approval to run a version of Vim or a Neovim at work, that's all I need and not another more binaries. Yeah, we can sing more offline, definitely, I guess.
日本語で失礼させていただきます。自分 Vim LSP は実は使ってないんですけれども、それはともかくとして、今まで Vim LSP でこう実装してきたっていうことについて一番難しかったこととか、苦労したことっていうのと、これから先 Vim LSP にもどんなものを追加しようとしているのか、なんか面白い話があったらお聞かせ願いたいなと思います。
He's curious that which was the hardest part for you to implement the Vim LSP, and what's the next implementation challenge?
So I think the hardest part about Vim LSP was actually not VimScript. In fact, like I think, so one really interesting thing about VimScript is when I was learning how to write VimScript, the only language server protocol that was sort of good enough was the Golang. So I was actually learning Go plus Vim LSP. And if you know how to write Go, you know how to write Vim. There's so much similarities between VimScript and Go. So I actually did not have issues with that. What I did have issues with trying to get a language server that actually works properly And because the problem was there was a spec, but everyone was just implementing whatever they wanted. Like no one was actually following the spec. And in fact, like when I was working on creating Vim script for Vim LSP, I was always like going and filing bugs in all this different LSP, and that was what I spent most of the time. I don't know if I answered your second question. If you can repeat.
Second question was what's the challenge like in the implementation level?
So I think in terms of implementation, one of the things I say to like my team is, when someone asks like, hey, is it possible? I think everything is possible in the world. Like if you just give it a big try. So I actually did not find it complicated because I had already solved all the difference with Neovim, Vim 8. I don't think there is much issue. It is really the protocol itself. I think right now, if you are not familiar with it, it uses UTF-16. So very things like that, or trying to get it very performant. I think there was another diff protocol that we sort of used. So trying to actually get it more performant was a bit, but in terms of actually Vim script, I don't think it is difficult. It's just that it's very hard to sometimes express what you want, but in terms of language itself, it's very simple.
I see. Thank you. Okay. Other questions? Oh, yeah, 下に。次の質問の人もどうぞ。
日本語ですみません、ありがとうございます。LSP だけじゃなくてデバッグアダプタープロトコルもマイクロソフトは出していて、で VS コードではデバッグアダプタープロトコルをサポートしています。で Vim の方でも多分 Vim スペクターとかがデバッグアダプタープロトコルのプラグインとしての実装を頑張っていて、で Emacs とかでもDAP モードとかがあるんですけど、でも中の実装を見ているとどうしてもすごくデバッグアダプタープロトコルは VS コードのプラグイン構成にすごく依存していて、どの他の IDE エディターもVS コードのパッケージをダウンロードしてくるみたいな構成になっていて、なんかすごく LSP の方と比べるとなんかVS コードのためのプロトコルみたいになってしまっているのかなと思うんですけど、その辺って何か見ていたり追っていたりされますか？
ちょっと長すぎて伝わってないので、最後の質問だけ。
デバッグアダプタープロトコルについてどう思われてますか？今ウォッチしていますか
？What do you think of the debug adapter protocol? The context is that.
とても VS コードに結構依存したプロトコルにちょっとなってしまっているかなと思うんですけど、ウォッチしたりしてますか？
So the current changes are very dependent. The current changes seems it's very depending on the VS Code implementation. Like, what do you think of the?
I mean, did you mean like currently it's? Could you again repeat that? Like, are you meaning that the language or protocol is very much dependent on VS Code, or?
ランゲージサーバープロトコルが VS コードに依存しているっぽいのに対して、
そうなんかプラグイン側がすごく VS コードの方の実装にプラグインじゃなくて
プロトコル
デバッグアダプターサーバーの方が VS コードのプラグイン体系にすごく依存している。
So he is worrying that the debug adapter implementation tend to depend on the client-side implementation.
So I'm not sure if the debug adapter itself is actually part of the LSP spec itself currently right now. So, and I think one of the things about the entire language server protocol, a bit more getting aligned to VS Code is, first is you need to actually dog food your protocol itself. And it's just, I'm speaking from myself. I've not had conversations with the folks at LSP, but yeah, I don't know if I did answer your question or not.
デバッグアダプターはそうLSP の一部とちょっと認識しないという感じです。ちょっと強くうまくできて申し訳ないです。ありがとうございます。はい、またそうですね。
Okay. So first of all, thanks for your talk and contribution with your OS community. And I'd like to ask you why you need to or you want to support Vim and Neovim both. Like I'm developing some plugin and I try to support Vim and Neovim, but that's why I'm using Vim and Neovim in a different environment. So I need to. That's why I support Vim and Neovim. But how about you?
I mean, for me, I actually use both Vim and Neovim. I don't use Neovim on Windows. It's primarily because it's not so stable. But on the Linux box or Mac box, I do both Vim and Neovim turn by turn. And my primary reason for supporting is, imagine you have 100 people out here, right? And out of the 100 people, let's say, even though a majority goes and uses one, whether it's Vim or Neovim, it could be a 70-30 or 60-40, even 50-50, I don't know. But anytime I go and use one, which is like, let's say I only support Neovim, I'm only satisfying that 70%. Or I'm only satisfying that 50%, or I'm only satisfying that 40%. For me, I truly believe in just open, where, and I actually like that Neovim exists. Like, I don't think Neovim should just forget everything and go to Vim, or Vim should forget everything. Like, I think having that choice, similar like how we have choice on browser, I think it is best for the customers, because now you have this two different products having a bit of different goals, trying to satisfy. So end of the day, it's me as a Vim user, it's great, right? And when you have both people from both the aisles coming and talking, I think there's a lot more contributions, because what can happen is the 5% of the Vim community might think a bit differently. They can participate in the contribution, or that 10% in Neovim community can sort of participate. And I think we can still use both. I think both, it's very good to actually have both. I think it would actually be very bad to not have Neovim, unless the entire Vim, how Vim work changes. But still now, I think Neovim is awesome.
Yeah, thanks. I completely agree with that.
はい、他に質問ありますか。
I was wondering that if in the first expression you used, in the title, you used the expression Renaissance, and in the final part of the slides you said that was revolution. This sounds like an industrial revolution. So did you have any intention about you use this expression? Because the first one sounds like the cultural things, and this one is more like industrial.
No, so if you actually go back and look at the history, the way I sort of course think about the Renaissance period is, like lots of arts and culture you sort of course see was actually influenced by that century. But when you sort of think about the revolution, I sort of think about the Industrial Revolution. You can sort of think about Renaissance period also as a revolution. But what I think the Industrial Revolution, and that's the image I sort of used, is we used to be riding on horses, in the carriage, but the Industrial Revolution completely changed how we actually transport ourselves, like from horses to cars, or from candles to lights. And I think that's what we sort of do. This doesn't mean that the Renaissance period is like, hey, we sort of ignore like how the politics actually run. We still a lot of depend on how it is decided then. So I think to me, that was the core context I sort of It's, I think, different phases of Vim. We had Vim as just Vim. I think Neovim especially helped bring that Renaissance period, really rethink at how Vim should be. But I think what's going to really happen is, when we have a better plugin ecosystem, a lot easier, where everyone in this room can write a plugin, I think that's when the Industrial Revolution. So I think in the next 5 years, or whenever this thing comes, it's going to be a lot better than what we have right now.
Okay. very interesting. Thank you very much.
他質問 Any questions?
すみません、日本語で。僕、実は Vim LSP を、LSP を Vim で使ったときに、初めて使ったプラグインが Vim LSP なんですね。なので、ちょっとこの場を借りて、お礼を申し上げます。ありがとうございます。で、質問なんですけど、僕も普段なんかいろいろ作ってるんですけど、OSS を、コントリビュートしたりとか作ったりするときに、作ったり、例えば毎日どれぐらい時間を使っているのかがちょっと気になっているので、大体毎日例えば 1,2 時間ぐらいやってるとかっていうのを、そういうお話をちょっとぜひ聞かせてください。
Okay, first, he'd like to say thank you to you because his first plugin ever when he started using Vim is Vim LSP.
Yeah, let's go.
And second, other question is that how many hours, like minute, like every day, do you spend on developing the OSS?
So at least this year, I actually don't spend much time on OSS. In fact, because I've been doing flying, like my weekend is like just flying. I fly for around 3 hours, then I have to come back, then I go to YouTube, study at how the plane actually flies or learn. So this year I've actually not. Usually during Christmas or New Year's when everyone is quiet, that's when I sort of course spend a lot of time. But to me, I think open source, it's not that I go spend time, it's when something clicks in my brain that, hey, I need to go build this thing, I just go build it. And then, sometimes it could just be like half an hour and then, okay, I need to go stop. Or sometimes it can even go late nights still, mornings that I'm just going and full, without coffee, just going and coding. So it really depends. But these days, I think we have Matten and Thomas from Vim LSP that does a pretty wonderful job at actually managing the core project too.
Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございました。わかりました。
Other questions? ちょっと待ってくださいね。時間あと何分ですか？大丈夫かな？ Other questions or okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's come down here.
So I've been spending the last 15 minutes trying to learn how the language server protocol is actually built, and I might be completely wrong, but from what I could gather, while it's a protocol, it's basically based on Node.js, because VS Code is based on Electron, so it's just natural that all the plugins would be built on top of Node.js. And while I looked at your code and the Vim LSP, it doesn't contain any Node code, but all the server side is actually written in Node. Is that right?
No, it actually depends. So the server piece that I was actually using was the TypeScript language server. And it makes sense for the TypeScript language server to be written in TypeScript because that's where people are familiar with. But if you go look at the Python language server, it's written in Python. If you go look at the C++ or C, I think even Apple has SourceKit, you'll actually see them being written in C. So use whatever core language that it's out of core. Now, there are certain languages such as I think LESS and CSS, which you can't write a programming language or program out of that. So people have used Node.js, or for I think the Docker language server, they have used Node.js. But it does not matter at what language server you use, because usually what happens is whatever the compiler is written in, that's where people usually tend to, because as part of building the compiler, you've already built a lot of information about how to understand your source code. So it sort of basically depends on that. So the examples I used, yes, it does use Node. Even though I use Node a lot, I'm actually not a fan of Node for certain things. I think every program has their own places, and editor and Node is just not the right place, I think. So it depends on your language.
Yeah, well, I was concerned that like you said that you didn't like that Python, the Python executable thing, and because of that, you actually replaced that problem.
No, so for me is when I meant by like using the ECMAScript or JavaScript. So if you think about it, there's two different things. ECMAScript and JavaScript is just a language. It is not the runtime. So I didn't mean to go and change it by a 10 meg node. There's lots of different embedded JavaScript engines, which is very light, and I sort of meant that. So not replaced by Node. I would not want Node as built-in Vim if that made sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? 質問大丈夫ですか？はい。
日本語で、Vim LSP のいろんな機能を実現するにあたって Vim 本体を直さないと実現できないことって結構あって、今まで僕も、直すために高速化のパッチとか送ったんですけど、まだ他に何かありますか？
He said that he has sent some patches both to Vim と Vim LSP 両方ですか
？Vim の方で。
He has sent some patches to Vim Core for some Vim LSPs, like to make it work.
Yeah.
Do you concern that there's like more?
Yeah, so one of the things, one of what I wanted as part of Vim LSP. So when I was actually, and I think it comes more from the Async complete plugin that I sort of used. Before Async complete plugin, what happens is, everyone used to have all the sort of hacks, such as, whenever your autocomplete or pop-up menu is visible, there is no way for the Vim to actually notify that someone changed the character. So what people used to do was they used to put a timer that goes and like checks, hey, did some character change? And those were sort of the hacks that I don't like at all, right? So, and I think a lot of work that you have done, I really appreciate quite a lot, because it actually is exactly what I want, right? Like rather than going and putting a bunch of hacks in the plugins, let's go fix Vim, let's go fix Neovim, let them know that, hey, this is something we need to sort of go do. And I think now that both code base is so much open, I think it makes no sense to like try to have hacks in the plugins. And it's so much easier to update these Vim and Neovim with all these package managers that I think the right fix should go in.
What about Science API?
Which API?
Sign.
Plus sign feature?
Sign
SIGN?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. I have both. I don't know. I don't know about the actual Signs API, because I have both mixed feelings with the Sign API. I think sometimes one of the biggest issues I actually find with Vim is I wish there was some process of an RFC that actually before going and implementing actually talk about like, hey, this is sort of an API I'm going to sort of use. What are your guys' thoughts? Or I think that would sort of create a lot much better APIs. But yeah, and for me, Vim Signs API is I think it's good, better than the last one, but I don't know. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Next is short break.